really excited. We have Ashley Bright back with us. The message fixer. I love it. Ashley, I have bright yellow glasses that I almost wore today in honor of you, but I had to switch it up and go purple. But anyway, we're really excited to have Ashley back with us. And because we're talking about recovery and moving back into more live events, more live meetings, we thought it might be a great idea to bring Ashley back and talk about the 5 tips for better communication. Before we get going with that amazing conversation that I've been so looking forward to, since we've all been in our bunkers and now we're getting ready to actually see somebody, smell somebody, talk to somebody, figure out how they look below the screen. We want to make sure that we thank all of our presenting sponsors. Without you, we would not be here having these amazing discussions as we are so fortunate to have each and every day. Again, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy, and I am not joined today by my intrepid co-host, the amazing nonprofit nerd herself, Jarrett Ransom. Jarrett is taking some well-earned time off this week, the kickoff of summer, so we will be seeing her next week. Okay, Ashley, back to you, my friend. 5 tips for better communication. I suspect you probably have 50, but we've asked you to boil it down to
and narrowed it down.
Not an easy thing to do. Not an easy thing to do. Okay, tip number 1, know your audience.
So this is one, I mean, whether you're talking virtual or in person, you know, it comes down to knowing your audience inside and out, because so many times I think as presenters, as subject matter experts, we go in sort of looking at it from our perspective. And then when the audience doesn't get it or they don't do what we want, we somehow want to blame, you know, them. Because ultimately, if you're not looking at kind of their perspective, why are they there to listen to you today? What are the challenges they're facing? What are their pain points? How can you bring value? If you're not looking at it from that standpoint and using, you know, a critical piece of human interaction, which is empathy, you know, if you're not using those things, then it just falls flat. Okay, you're just the points you're going to cover, the language you use, the imagery you use, all of those things can just fall flat if you're not really confident in who they are. I years ago would joke in a workshop, I'd have, you know, if people are coming and they're expecting a big juicy cheeseburger and fries, that's what they've expected, and then you roll in with, you know, a very fancy, well, I was going to say a very fancy plate of sushi. Not that the sushi is not wonderful, but it's not what they expected. It's maybe not what they wanted, and so it just there's a disconnect, and that's really why you just need to know your audience. Who are you speaking to? What do they care about? And how can you add value?
You know, it's interesting because I would imagine that their groups, whether we're meeting them in person or virtually or a hybrid, that they might not know what's going on. This is going to be new for them too. There's such a shift in how we're behaving and what we're doing. So it's got to be even harder than it was before to know your room, to know your audience.
True. And I think, you know, that's where that empathy really comes into play, is being kind of aware of what's going on around you. So, for example, early on in the pandemic, as things are starting to change, businesses are closing down, people are working remotely, it was something that I think we were all highly aware of. And so we would acknowledge that. You know, many of the conversations I'd have or I'd be part of would start with something akin to, hey, I know we're all going through some challenging times, et cetera, et cetera. But then as we got a few months into it and people were adapting, that was less of a topic. And so it was more about, we've adapted, how are you thriving, what's going on? And I think similarly, as we now transition back to some sense of normalcy, a new normal, I think it's having that same kind of radar on and acknowledging that like, hey, it's great to be back together. Isn't this amazing? Like, even just little kind of moments like that, it just binds people together. And this is kind of a special moment. We're in the same room, we're in vicinity, we're not, you know, remote and staring at our screens in our underwear.
Exactly. Well, you know, I keep thinking about people that have like added to their teams, who've made new relationships, who do not know what they look like from, you know, here down. you know, how tall they are. I mean, for
Oh, you have shoes. Oh, I didn't know you were into shoes.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be kind of an interesting thing. Okay, now tip number 2, we got to find out what that is, because
Let's bring up the big board.
Bring up the big board. Get clear on your goal.
Yes, this is a big one. And this one ties into that first point, which is know your audience.
Mhm.
So, you know, we often, you know, I always say to clients, I say this in workshops, that your number one goal should be to inspire action from your listener, whatever that is, you know, close a deal, get a handshake, get a meeting, get a donation, whatever that is. And so getting really clear on what is your goal for this piece of communication. And then, you know, based on what you know about your audience, what are their challenges? How can I add value? Then what is my goal? And if my goal is for them to adopt an idea, then I need to kind of rally everything I'm doing around that. And don't, you know, this gets into our third point. I don't want to give it away, but, you know, our third point, which, you know, how do you curate the information you're sharing? Well, it's all rallied around that goal. So these points kind of build on one another. You know, knowing who your audience is, what do they need? How can I add value? And then what's my goal for this conversation? And how do I align what I'm going to talk about specifically to that goal? Because, you know, many times we get in this mindset of like, well, this is my one chance. I'm going to just share everything. I'm so awesome and they're going to love it.
Yes.
And it's not that you're not awesome. And it's not that you don't have great things to share. But the truth is that as human beings, we can only consume so much information. You know, the truth is we can really remember maybe 3 things. And, you know, when it comes right down to it, you want to try and align those 3 things to one goal. And so that's kind of really critical. And I often used to joke that, you know, it's one goal, it's not 10 goals. You know, whenever you start off a meeting with like, here are our 10 priorities for this meeting. Yeah. You can already feel like, okay, this is going to go a little sideways. It's not bad to have points that ladder up to a core goal, but if you're going in with 10 goals, it's a little bit of a challenge from the beginning. So,
and you know, Ashley, I can see what you're saying here, because we have not been together, that there's probably going to be this like, I got to get it all done. I got to say it all now. I got to, you know, it's that fire hose approach that you're just jamming everything in versus finding your cadence. And yeah, I needed to hear this because I have a meeting this afternoon that's kind of important and I have way too much. Thank you, sir.
Well, and you're welcome. And the other thing is to think about, like, not only are we keeping the mindset, you know, what is going on with our audience, but where are they in the process? Yeah. And so if this is, for example, an initial engagement with a new group of people, they don't know you from Adam, then keep that in mind in terms of the amount of information you share, knowing that the whole point of this is I want them to, let's say, set up a follow-up meeting or a call or come to this next event. Good. So share what's valuable for that first one, knowing that, okay, half of them, maybe they're going to come back for the second one, and then I'll share this additional info. And then that maybe leads to a volunteer opportunity or donations or join our board or whatever that goal is. And you know, do your information accordingly. It's much the way I think about websites. You know, you don't want to fire hose someone in the beginning on the first page. You want to like give them the key things that are going to get them into the next page and the next page. Now they're down to the third level. You can assume like, hey, they're really interested in this one topic, so I'm going to give them the white paper, all the detail. Right. And think about your talk that way as well.
I love it. Okay, so 1 and 2 have been good.
All right.
And now we're on to 3. Less is more. So I see where you're going here.
Yes, I was trying not to give this one away. But
this is, I understand now kind of what you're thinking here. And you made the comment 3 pieces, and I just did 6, but 3 pieces of information are really going to be more something you can capture and you can retain.
Yeah, I like to think about it, you know, I learned this years ago and I wish I could remember where, but it's almost like you imagine kind of, you've got a core takeaway or a core goal that you want someone to learn from this conversation. And then think about like, what are the 3 pillars that kind of support that goal? And that's the way, a really simple way to think about structuring your content. So if you have this one goal that you want people to take, this one action, what are the three pieces of content or pillars that support that action? And in those, we're addressing, audience resistance to this point, how we're going to help them or benefit, how we're going to solve their pain point, et cetera, et cetera. And that's usually, the way you think about it, because I mean, we've all been in those meetings where you walk out and you're just like, you're tired, you're overwhelmed, you don't know what you got out of it. And then others where you're like, just excited, you can't wait to share. You're like texting like, oh my God, I just spent time in this thing. It's amazing. You should learn from it. And that's the difference when you haven't been saturated, you haven't been fire hosed, as you said. Yeah.
Well, and I would imagine, and again, we're kind of been framing this conversation with the lens of recovery.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to respect that people traveling to a meeting, going into an office environment, they're going to have a lot of external things going on that's actually going to even change up the whole dynamic more, right? I mean, just,
I mean,
they haven't dressed professionally, or they're wearing high heels, or
yep, they're learning how to re-walk in high heels. Maybe they haven't been up,
Oh my God, that's hilarious. Okay, it's like my life, my secret life here. Yeah. Oh my God, that's hilarious. That is so funny. Okay, now this is another part, and tip 4,
mm-hmm.
lead with emotion. This I'm kind of challenged with, and I'm really interested to get your ideas on this. I mean, in the nonprofit sector, it is emotional. And that's part of what we do. And sometimes I think we prey on that aspect of it, for right or for wrong. So talk to us about lead with emotion.
Sure. So it's, I think that maybe, it's interesting. I always sort of found this dynamic really interesting, that when I work with for-profit organizations, they tend to want to lead with logic, and then nonprofits want to lead with emotion. And I've often joked that, like, I wish the for-profits could learn a lot from the nonprofits, and vice versa. Because I think there's a lot of strategic thinking that for-profits do that I wish some of my nonprofit clients were thinking about. But again, regardless of nonprofit, for-profit, we're all human beings. Mm-hmm. And so when I say emotion, the core thing, and this is not a revolutionary idea, but story. Yeah. Story is a key element of the way we communicate as human beings, going back to, our ancestors and sitting around a campfire and all that stuff. And so it's emotion. And, one of the things I talk about in my workshops is there's a great book by a guy named Daniel Kahneman. It's called Think Fast and Slow. And in it, he talks about, essentially, there's two different systems going on in the brain. There's system 1, which is that, that fight or flight mechanism. It reacts without thinking. It controls our breathing and our heart rate and all those things. But then there's system 2, which is sort of set aside for that complex calculations, think doing your taxes, doing math, anything complicated. And so the thing is that the way we process information, and the reason why so many meetings and presentations are boring and confusing, is because they're rooted in logic, and they're just all about taxing system 2 of the brain. And system 2 does not like to do that. I mean, it's sort of like having a workout. If you don't have to work out, you don't want to, right? Our bodies will say, no, we're good. And so, when you lead with emotion, meaning engage that system 1 first, it kind of lets you in, as a listener. It brings them in. You lean forward because you want to learn more. You're engaged. It's something I refer to as common ground. You start to create that. You're shrinking that gap between you and your listener. And so once you do that, it's kind of like it opens up sort of the floodgates to a certain extent. Now they're engaged, they're interested. And so now, since we do make decisions with emotion and logic, you're now starting to back that up. So emotionally, we get someone engaged with a great story. And then we back it up with some logic, some data, some evidence, so that now if I'm learning about an organization, I'm now more connected. I've built that trust because I've learned about how they're bringing value, how they're impacting people's lives, how they're changing the lives of people in my community. And then now I'm hearing how they're backing it up in terms of the way their programs actually work. What's the results? What's the output? And that's kind of where you start to find that balance between that emotion and logic. And also, we didn't talk about this, but vulnerability. This is something that's very challenging. But, as a speaker, there's nothing better than a little bit of vulnerability a little giving of yourself that the audience will respond to. And it's something fun. It's funny enough when you see CEOs and business leaders do it, it's often written about, like, oh my God,
Oh,
you're so vulnerable.
oh yeah.
In the nonprofit space, we kind of take it for granted that that's very evident. But again, we're all human beings, we're all communicating. And so, how do we find that balance with emotion and logic? And I always say, lead with emotion. It opens the door to everything else. So
Interesting. I like that. And I think that it's kind of an interesting aspect of where we've all been. It seems to me that for a lot of our meetings, our in-person events, we're going to have to notch out some time for this emotional part of what did you do during the recovery or during COVID, or how have you been impacted? There's so many people that have suffered loss. We have the social justice pandemic. We have major economic, issues. We have political divide. It seems to me like maybe this is going to be one of those things that's a little tricky to walk.
I agree. There's going to be some challenges, and I think there's going to be a need for a new approach to kind of icebreakers, if you will.
Yeah,
in workshops and things. Can you, is there a fun way for people to share kind of the crazy things that happened during the pandemic, or just the way they adapted.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always, I think that, yes, obviously there are some very serious things that happened. There's a very serious things that were revealed, and people went through some very serious things that can't be overlooked. But there was also a lot of humor, a lot of fun times, a lot of family moments. And, so it's kind of finding that balance.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think that's true. I mean, I right off the top of my head, I've noticed that I've been, just literally in the past 2 weeks, I've had out of office meetings, more social events, and people have been talking about food because it seems like it's safe. And a lot of, men and women saying, I learned how to bake bread. That seems like, and if you just like go around the rooms, you're hearing people, I started gardening, or, to your point, kind of like safe pieces of information that can, somewhat be discussed.
It's finding that universal thread, because we've all been through this in different ways, but there's that universal experience that can tie it all together. I mean, my kids have been baking. My oldest he's like, I want to learn how to make bagels. And so that's going to be one of our tasks this week over the summer. And
I love it. It's kind of an interesting thing. I'm thrilled that you brought that up. Okay, now this is going to be really kind of interesting because I have no idea where you're going with this. And tip number 5, get loud and get moving.
Yes. So again, these are applicable virtually or in person, but definitely in person, this will resonate more. So point number 1 there, get loud.
Yeah.
Okay. We forget sometimes that our voice is our instrument for communication. And it has, as we've seen from, opera and music and all sorts of things, that there's an incredible range. And so even more so when you're in a physical environment, getting really comfortable with your voice, how to project that voice, the highs and lows, the tones, the inflection, and just really starting to use that. And it's surprising. Sometimes I work with clients and they're not used to hearing their own voice. And so especially if they're in a physical environment or they're mic'd up and they hear their voice kind of echoing back, it can send them into sort of further anxiety about that moment.
Yeah.
And so I always say when we're rehearsing to, don't say it in your head, say it out loud. If you have to say it in the shower or your car or wherever it is, get comfortable with it and learn how to project your voice and the highs and lows and all those things. So that's point number 1, get loud. And then point number 2, get moving. And so especially if you're in a physical environment, I mean, you're seeing I'm doing a lot of stuff with my hands, so it's still applicable, but in a physical environment, moving around is an incredibly valuable tool for a few different reasons. 1, it will help your audience stay engaged. It always makes me think of being in grade school and you didn't know the answer. And so when the teacher starts to look around or move around to look for someone to volunteer, everyone gets really small. And so we're going to use that principle for good, for benefit in our conversation. And you move around because people are kind of, they're scanning, they're keeping an eye on you. So that's a really important point. Also, the perception when someone moves around, it's perceived as confidence. When you watch, because it's all about body language. I mean, there's some study somewhere, I don't know where it is, that like 70% of what people take away from you is the body language and the way you're moving around, your gestures. And so if you're very small and kind of anchored in one spot, that conveys something to your audience, even if what you're talking about is incredibly valuable and significant. But imagine now if you're saying all those valuable, significant things, but you're also moving around and landing that message. So you move and you make eye contact with your audience and land a message, and then you move across and land another message, and then you land it in the middle. And that's really powerful. And then another great thing, and this is something, again, I talk to my clients about in rehearsals, is we have that, I talked about system 1 and system 2. Well, system 1 is kicking in when that, that fight or flight, that anxiety, that nervous energy that comes when you're going to speak. And when you see people fidgeting and they don't know what to do with their hands, it's because that energy is coursing through their body, trying to find a place to go. Because really, your body is saying, you're about to die. I'm going to try and help you survive. So you're going to be able to climb a tree, jump over a fence, whatever that is, right?
Right.
So instead, if you get comfortable moving around, it gives that energy a place to go so that you're less fidgety, you're less nervous. And the great thing is that to you, it's helping control that anxiety, but to your audience, it's perceived as confidence and engagement. And so that was sort of a little esoteric in the way I described it there, which was on purpose. But yes, once you unpack it, get loud and get moving are critical pieces in the performance.
I love it. I think this has been super timely because so many of us are going to be all of a sudden thrown into situations where we are convening with our teams, where we are trying to present our new ideas, whether it be around a board table or in front of an audience on a stage. I mean, this more than anybody, the pitch concept for fund development, even fundraising is just really become a hot button and something that so many groups are doing. Before we let you go, because we don't have much time, you shared off camera, and I hope you will share with our viewers today. You have a really interesting story that just broke, and I realize it's sensitive, so you're not going to be able to identify the folks that you're talking about. But will you share with us what you just learned in the past 24 hours?
Certainly. So I had the great pleasure of meeting 3 different nonprofit leaders about 6 weeks ago. And they reached out and said, we've been shortlisted for this pitch, this grant. It's going to be great. We're terrified. We don't know what to do. We don't know where to start. And so we worked together and essentially what it was a grant pitch for $250,000. And, so nothing, go big or go home.
Yeah.
And the challenge was not only were they going to have to pitch in a particular time frame, but also they were 3 different organizations that had teamed up for this program that they were pitching. And so it was a lot of challenging information. And so worked with them to help identify, again, much like what we talked about, what was the goal? Who are the people that are going to be evaluating this? How do you align that content to really showcase the real opportunity with this program? And then how do you give each of those 3 organizations ample due so you can really see how they're contributing value? And then in the performance piece of it, how do you allow each of those 3 nonprofit leaders to be able to speak? And in this case, it was on video, but nonetheless, they were transitioning from one speaker to the next and then back as they move through this. And I was so excited because not only was it amazing to work with them and learn more about the program, but I literally found out last night in an email that they won. And
I'm so excited.
So amazing way to kick things off with a $250,000 grant to put together a program that, again, I can't reveal, but it's going to have so much value and impact for the community that they serve. And I believe really create sort of a milestone that will be something other communities and other regions in the country are going to look at as a model to adopt and start to grow themselves to have more impact. So I
Wow.
love that, because they really going in were like, well, I don't know, I'm not sure if we're, there was a bit of a like underdog quality to the conversation.
Sure.
And I kept saying, like, you guys are going to knock it out of the park. I believe in you. And so there you go. So a reminder that, pitching is no small feat, but the outcomes can be amazing. And so every time you get a chance to communicate with someone, inspire action and put your best foot forward. So.
Wow, it's super cool. And thank you for sharing that. I know that these things are tenuous and that you have to tread lightly and all of that, but that's really exciting. And again, Ashley, I mean, you know this better than anyone, but this has really captured the attention of funders and donors. And we're going to see more and more of the style. And it's a competitive nature that nonprofits are sometimes extremely uncomfortable with. But shoot, it is just like every day, I know just coming to my office, the emails about, these pitches that are available or funding opportunities, but it is being structured through a pitch.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And it really levels the playing field in terms of whether you're talking about nonprofits or for-profits.
Yeah.
I work with them all, and they all have to go through this rigor. They all have to jump through hoops and check all the boxes. And usually it includes some sort of a pitch.
Yeah.
And when they do it right, that's the beginning of something amazing. So
I love it. Well, Ashley, this has been a great way to start off our week. I want everybody to see Ashley's information again here. Ashley Bright Presents. Check out his website. He's got some great information on it. And just today, the 5 tips that he shared with us about communication. Wow, those are gems. I know that we just scratched the surface in our very short period of time today. But Ashley, thank you so much for coming on the Nonprofit Show and sharing your time and talent with us. Again, I'm Julia Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I have not been joined today by my co-host, Jarrett Ransom. She's taking a well-earned vacation this week. Again, we want to thank all of our presenting sponsors. Without you, we would not be here having these amazing conversations that we've had not only today, but Ashley, this is our 301st episode.
Woo, I'm clapping.
Thank you.
For you.
Thank you. We actually celebrated our 300th episode last Friday. So that's crazy. And of course, we are not done. Today, we are launching a new show called Fundraising Events TV. My co-host is Jason Allen Champion, a former HGTV star. He has been involved in the nonprofit landscape his entire life. He's out of the East Coast, and we are going to be really delving into just the topic of fundraising events. So from golf to galas, from barns to ballrooms, we're going to be talking about it all. So join us on Fundraising Events TV. We'd love to see you. Hey, Ashley, you've totally inspired me. I have a big meeting this afternoon. This is like the honest truth. I'm going to go back and I'm going to cull all of the stuff that I was going to jam at these people.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And I want to thank you for the second opportunity to appear on your show. And I thank you for the opportunity. I thank you and Jarrett for the work that you guys are doing to give voice to nonprofits and lend tips and knowledge. We can all benefit and help each other. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You are always a delight to talk with. And as we end the show, we want to remind everybody the way that we end every show. And that is to stay well so you can do well. We'll see you back here tomorrow, everyone.